I'm always asking myself if I'm happy being an architect. Often I think I should be a craftsman because I truly enjoy making things with my hands. As an architect, I can't build a house on my own. I need to give my drawings to carpenters and craftsmen. The moment I give my drawings away, I start to worry because I'm not participating in the process. To make architecture is to make war. The only difference is that in architecture, there is no victory. Victory should satisfy you, but buildings rarely do. I've never been satisfied with what I've built. Progressing or regressing in one's development really depends on the subject. To be always standing on tiptoe, concentrating, ready to make an advance, are the lessons I learned in boxing, which I use in my work as well. I'm always planning new projects before actually getting the commission. I often dream that I meet a client, design a project, and try to complete it, and then my dream ends. Or sometimes I meet a client, and when I finish explaining my design, he or she disappears, and that's when I wake up. There was an exhibition of my work in Osaka in the spring of 1987. I presented a model for a chapel on the water. Kosaku Seki, president of the Alpha Resort Tomamu, saw the exhibition and told me he wanted to have the chapel built. I was very surprised by his response. His passion, courage, and love of adventure convinced me to execute this project. We immediately went to see this beautiful and enormous landscape in Hokkaido. Together, we decided on a specific site for the chapel, which has recently been completed. When I saw this site, I was very happy and I felt privileged to be able to design a building for such a beautiful environment on the shores of Lake Shirakaba. I started to think about how to place my building in the landscape without destroying these beautiful trees, without destroying nature. The difference between my architecture and Western architecture lies in the understanding of nature. We Japanese accept nature and live in harmony with it. Western people try to protect themselves from nature. In my mid-30s, I first began to think of the possibility of creating an international architecture that could only be conceived by someone Japanese. When I first saw this site, I was inspired to create a large body of water, which was the image I wanted. By placing this cross and a body of flowing water, I wanted to express the idea of God as existing in one's heart and mind, rather than something that is merely presented to you by someone else. I also wanted to create a space in which one can peacefully sit and meditate. The real cross is in the water. These 4 crosses are meant as sculpture. They are duplicated at night by being reflected in sheets of glass that surround them. People pass through this illusionary transitional space before entering the chapel. To create a flat body of flowing water is not an easy task. Seemingly simple things, such as making water flow flat or making concrete smooth, are the most difficult qualities to achieve. For instance, it is much easier to create a waterfall. An in-depth study of the characteristics and the behavior of such elements is necessary due to the limited number of material possibilities. Each work is a challenge to create a new space, rich in potential, that no one has experienced before.
As a Methodist minister, I am sorry to say that there aren't many people in this country who are seriously interested in Christianity. Even though only 1% of the Japanese population is Christian, it has become very fashionable to be married in a church. The ritual is easy to understand and therefore accepted by those who decide to have their weddings there.
You never really know what a building will look like until it is completed. In our generation, scientific and technical advance is so significant, especially in the West, that architecture is almost totally conditioned by it. In the next generation, I feel that the role of nature will become just as important. Seen in this light, the idea of God and nature will become somewhat different. I believe that eventually Western and Eastern thinking will overlap and open to a new world. In a central section of Osaka, as in Kyoto and Tokyo, you can still find groups of tenement housing that have survived the war. The Tomishima House of 1972, now my office, stands on the corner on this street of tenements. After building furniture, interiors, and small houses, I opened my own office. A friend told me about a young couple named Tomishima who wanted someone to redesign their old tenement. This was my first commission. Originally, I designed this house for three, the couple and their child. The wife then became pregnant and had twins. The house was too small for 5 people. So, as a joke, they said it was bad planning on the architect's part and asked me to take the responsibility.
その時に隣に40平方メートルぐらいの小さいところがあったわけですけれども、それも含めて買い取りましてそこに増築しました。まず富島邸というオフィスを
We subsequently bought this house, and it became my office. Since then, we have changed the building many times. I like the idea of renovating my own office because it means I'm always testing my ideas.
建築の現場というものにいつも身を置くことによって、ある意味で自分が自分を安心できるということで作っております。こっちというのがね。
I never went to architecture school. I studied architecture on my own by going to see actual buildings and reading books about them. I felt I could learn more if I read about the space while experiencing it at the same time. Because the ancient cities of Kyoto and Nara are nearby, there's a lot of great traditional architecture in this area. When I was about 18, I started to visit the temples, shrines, and tea houses in Kyoto. I was impressed by the way the architecture was located in harmony with the surrounding nature. By sitting in this garden at the Ryoanji Temple, I found an infinite tranquility.
ですから非常に奥行きのある静かな庭である。京都の中でも一番僕にとっては好きな庭です。しかし今日本の建築の中にこういう
Unfortunately, I think that Japanese contemporary architecture has not incorporated the good qualities of traditional Japanese culture. Since World War II, our culture has been heavily influenced by the West. Many old and good things have been lost along the way. I'm not talking about external things, such as form or material, but a way of thinking. What interests me most is to find a way to continue these traditional Japanese concepts and values, and thereby pass them on to the next generation. In an old section of Kyoto stands a 3-story commercial building completed in 1984. When I first saw the site, I wondered how I could incorporate the river successfully into my design. As you can see in my drawing here, this so-called Times building actually includes the river, specifically the section between these two bridges. In Japan, gardens such as the rock garden of Ryoanji Temple are very well known. but I couldn't really think of an example of a traditional garden where one enjoys the view of a river. So, this new garden concept became the aim of the project. Although modern material such as concrete was used, I wanted to make an architecture that referred to the traditional look of Kyoto. To recreate the feeling of small streets and piazzas that one experiences in this city.
まず同時にいわゆる京都の持ってる路地とか小さい広場とかというような感性をここにうまく再現できないかな。
I wanted to create a unity between the building and the river by eliminating a borderline between the two elements. You walk through a labyrinth-like structure where you don't know how much of it is building and how much of it is nature, because you're constantly going in and out of interior and exterior spaces. I envisioned the project as an urban environment rather than a single building. So far, I have only built this one building containing fashion boutiques. At this point, I plan to expand this complex, starting with a building right next to it as a gallery, and here a restaurant. そしてまたその次にもう少し小さい建物を作ることによって川沿いに一つのランドスケープを作るということを考えていました。そうすれば Eventually, the river bank will be entirely filled with buildings, creating a complete public space. 出来上がって一つの川を挟んだ大きな町づくりができるのではないかということを考えています。これ見られました。はい。Life in Kyoto has a different pace. People in Osaka are more dynamic and active. They are full of vitality, always interested in new things, not only in terms of accepting, but also creating them. Osaka people combine creativity with their talent for commerce. Here in Osaka, where I grew up, there used to be many markets like this. This is a kind of place where not only goods are exchanged, but people communicate with each other. It is sad that these markets are slowly disappearing. I like being here, listening to people actively talking to each other. The prime emphasis on economy and function have served to obscure the real aim of modern architecture. Ease of construction and efficiency have become overemphasized at the expense of spatial richness. Symbolism in architecture and ornament were both eliminated. With such a reduction, you started to really lose the enjoyment of human life. In the course of my development as an architect, I have tried to re-examine all these elements that were eliminated and bring them back into my architecture. The Aka building, completed in 1988, is in the middle of Osaka City, in a lively section where there are numerous restaurants, boutiques, and department stores.
非常に単純なボックス
From the exterior, it looks like a
中
simple
にどういうものが入って
box,
る
and
か
you
わからない
can't imagine
そして
what's
この道
inside.
からずーっとこう入ってきた時に全く違うその風景が展開
As
され
you
る
walk in, you are
ですか
startled
ら
by changing
ここでは
vistas.
その中と
I
外が
wanted to
全
create a
く
world
その
where
違
the
う
interior and
世界を
exterior
作りた
differ
いなと思って
completely. Views
そ
are
して何回
constantly
も
changing
そ
as you
の
walk
歩きなが
further
ら
inside
そ
the
のいろいろ
building.
な風景が
It
一
is
つの
something you
小さい
can't
箱の
conceive
中
of
で
from
こう
the
展開して
outside.
ですからここではずーっと上がっていきながら
I wanted to
全
create a
く
space
外からでは
that you
感
would
じる
wish
こ
to
とができない世
explore,
界を
so that when you come in
作り
from
た
the
い
entrance, you go
そして
straight
だんだんと
forward
こう空
until
に
you
向かっ
reach the
て
end of the
こ
hall.
う上がっていく
Then you go up on these stairs, so this alley-like hallway, flanked by
ですから
shops,
上の方にも
functions
のす
as
ご
a
い
way
面
of
白い
getting
空間があるん
around
だとい
as
うの
well
で
as a
どん
unifying
どんとこう
element
人 間
for
が上
all
が
the
っていくよ
different
うな
stores.
その立体的なスペースにしたかったんです。この建物で一つ大きな
One of the main characteristics of this building is the large open vertical space, like an atrium.
ともかくひたすらそのお店をたくさん
Most Japanese commercial architecture after the war has concerned itself with trying to pack as many stores as possible into a given space. Meaningful waste of space has been eliminated for the sake of efficiency.
そしてこれからの
The balance between wasted space and efficiency is a focal point in this particular project.
ものが本来的な建築になっていくんではないかということを意味しております。そしてここではほとんどのシーズン上からこう下までずっとこう雨がこう入ってくるわけですけれ
In
ども、
this project,
こ
I
の
wanted
ス
to
ペ
build a
ースの一番
three-dimensional
の目的は
plaza.
やはり何よりも
My main
立体的
aim
な
was
広
to
場なんだから
incorporate the
オールシーズ
outside
ン風
weather
も
in
光
all
も雨も入って
seasons,
くるような空
including
間にしたか
rain,
ったという
wind,
感
and
じです。
sunshine. While designing this project, I thought of the Pantheon in Rome and Piranesi's etchings of prisons.
ですからここではその1
As
階
you
か
go
ら
down
1
to the
階までずっ
basement from the
と
first
降
floor,
りていく
the
ことによって
changing view creates a
起こる
spatial
その
drama.
空間のドラマというようなものを作りたいなと思いました。ここに見て分かりますようにピラネ
You
ー
can
ジ
see the
の
image
その
of the
めくりめくよう
Piranesian
な迷路
labyrinth
性みたいなも
in
のが
this
この空間の
space.
中であると。これはまあ一
This
つ
would normally be considered wasted
今までの建
space
築
and
でいうと
therefore
その
eliminated.
作りにくいとかまた無駄であるということで切り捨てられた部分であります。ちょうどこれが下から上まで6層分あるわけですけれども、ここに入った途端
From
に
here,
都
you
市の
can see
中
all
の
the way
一
to the
つ
sixth floor.
のどういうんですか穴場というようなことに
It feels
なるん
like
じゃ
a
ないかと思い
cave
ます。そして
in the
建
city.
築からその忘れられて
I
い
want to
た
bring back
そ
some
の
of the drama that's been
感動みたい
neglected
な
in
ものを
modern
取り戻した
architecture.
いなと思いました。僕自身の建築の作り方
Making architecture is like riding a bicycle. Unless you continue pedaling, you stop and fall. More powerful firms go uphill on 4 wheels, and once they get to the top, they have enough people to keep them going automatically.
2人はここがなくても自然に
But we don't have much power because we're a small firm. We need to keep pedaling without stopping. So as long as I'm pedaling away, my staff won't have any time for rest either.
休むことがないだろう。
You can't fight a war on your own. You can't build a building on your own. So I demand psychological and physical strength from each member of my team. And I demand the same thing of myself. In order to build great buildings all over Japan, we are constantly fighting these wars. More than just functioning as a small group of office workers, we act as a small group of guerrillas. Each project is executed by one person from my staff and myself, working as a team of 2. Thus, when there are 9 projects, we have 9 people on staff. Although we have several part-time students, the basic working unit is 2 people per project. Once we start a project, we don't have any rest until it's completed. 9 people work hard, and I also work hard on all 9 projects at the same time. There are always ups and downs in architecture. Because I was successful with one project doesn't mean my next one will be successful as well. In fact, there's a pretty good chance that it won't be as good. So you're always on the line. Make sure you are at the site whenever you need to be. If there's no one at the site, it doesn't make a good impression on the client. They might think that we are a bit strange as a team of guerrillas, but they feel that they can trust us. When a client and I have totally different views about architecture, we usually spend half a year discussing our differences. During this time, I decide whether it is possible to proceed to another stage of the project or whether to decline the commission. With 7 out of 10 clients, disagreements are never resolved. When our differences cannot be resolved, there's no point in continuing. Some people have said that I eat architecture in order to live, and that's why I don't get exhausted. Perhaps I do eat architecture to live. On the other hand, I feel sorry for my staff. I am sure that they are very tired by now.
My husband is an architect who designs office buildings. At first, he thought that he should design our house himself. But because he was so busy at the time, and because we wanted to have the most beautiful house, my husband chose to ask Mr. Ando.
From the exterior, the house is a simple structure, a basic cube surrounded by walls.
その中に3家族がそのプライバシーを保ちながら仲良く
The interior is a bit more complicated because I had to provide a space where 3 different families could live together while maintaining their privacy. This extended family includes Mr. and Mrs. Kidosaki, Mr. Kidosaki's father, and Mrs. Kidosaki's mother and her younger sister.
ところは中庭ですけれども、地下に中庭がある。
In order to allow for privacy, I placed many of the terraces on different levels.
自然と生活とが一体になると。そしてまだ1階に
There's one on the ground floor,
上
one
もう一
on
階
the
に
first floor,
中庭があらゆるところ
and
に
another on the second floor.
入ってくると。例えばここにある
The terraces provide the residents with a relationship to nature.
まして、その記憶を
2 large trees in this house are kept as a memory from the previous
僕
residents.
の部屋から見る
Different rooms have different views of these
また僕の部
trees.
屋から見るあらゆる角度から楽しめるようにと。そしてそれを
By
返して
sharing different views, residents share their lives as well.
いうふうに考えております。この今その
Here we are
こ
in
こは
one of the
今
living rooms.
リビングダイニングルームとリビングルーム。この住まいの特徴はもう一つ
Another aspect of this house is that the rooms have different spatial characteristics which create rhythmic sequences. For instance, the dining room has a low ceiling, while the living room has a very high ceiling.
そして自分が手の触れる
Anything that you can touch, such as floors and furniture, are all made from natural materials. This is within the Japanese tradition.
愛するという意味で作られています。ここは大体ほとんど半分
This is another one of the living rooms. The lower half is underground.
で日本の
Next to this room is another dining room. By placing these rooms in different directions, I was able to create variations of light and dark spaces, a concept that has been neglected by modern architecture.
部分が作ってある。でこの建築の
Beauty is felt in traditional Japanese architecture when spaces are illuminated by small rays of light.
を象徴していくかと。例えば日本のところの
This living room is illuminated by that same light coming in through the terrace.
光が中庭をちょっと
Gentle light casts a shadow of trees on the terrace wall.
そういうその
Nature is embodied in my architecture in the form of light.
ですから
In this house, it is not the physical or material aspects that are interesting, but the movement of nature through space that defines the architecture.
My husband's father is the owner of this house. He was born and raised in a traditional Japanese house on this site. The house was in the middle of a garden, surrounded by a fence. So when he saw this box-like structure, he was so shocked that he couldn't say anything. But since we moved in 2 years ago, he has grown to like the house. There is something very traditionally Japanese about the way the space is treated. It is very quiet and peaceful.
When I was 19, I discovered Le Corbusier by finding a book about him in a second-hand bookstore in Osaka. It was a lot of money for me at the time. While I was saving up for it, I used to check with the man at the bookshop every 3 days to make sure the book was still there. After I bought the book, I traced the drawings of his early period so many times that all the pages turned black. Whenever I saw something or thought about something, I always wondered how Le Corbusier would have thought about the same thing. If Le Corbusier had a chance to see my architecture, he probably would have told me to be more free. I think my architecture is quite restricted because I tried to create freedom through confinement.
I was born in Osaka in 1942.
6 months later, World War II began. By the end of the war, there was little left of Osaka. I was the eldest of twin boys, and because it was decided that my maternal grandmother was to raise me, I was given her name, Ando. My grandmother had become a successful merchant before the war, and her strong values influenced me a great deal. Our first home was near the port of Osaka. Later, we moved to another part of the city where I live to this day. Doing well in school was never that important to my grandmother. She gave me the freedom to do things on my own. I was not a good student. I did not listen to my teachers. I always preferred learning things on my own, outside of the classroom. A master at the carpentry shop across the street showed me how to make things. He taught me how to carefully examine each step of a process, first studying the materials, and then collecting the right tools. So, at an early age, I learned to consider all possibilities before starting a project. I never worked for another architect. Whenever I tried, I was fired within 3 days because of my stubbornness and temper. My first attempts at designing consisted of small wooden houses, interiors, and furniture. It was during the development of these small-scale projects that I began to experiment with and formulate my ideas. In the 1960s, I made several trips to Europe and America to learn more about the architecture of the West. These trips were all important to me. Today, I still travel to look at architecture. Here I find myself at Frank Lloyd Wright's Falling Water in Pennsylvania. Being here makes me realize the importance of an architect's imagination in siting a building. This house is situated in harmony with nature, incorporating the waterfall and the surrounding landscape. In this work, nature and architecture interact so effectively that it seems as if nature and architecture are conversing with each other. It's like having a river in your home. When I was 17, I went to Tokyo for the first time and saw Frank Lloyd Wright's Imperial Hotel. I had never heard of Frank Lloyd Wright and didn't know anything about the hotel, but the power of fascination and attraction has little to do with intellectual knowledge. The Imperial Hotel was one of those buildings that fascinated me, and my curiosity took me inside. The building had a very strong and mysterious power. I felt something very Japanese in the architecture. Since then, I have read that Wright was influenced by the Book of Tea by Tenshin Okakura, and this interested me very much. Wright learned the most important aspect of architecture, namely the treatment of space, from Japanese architecture.
それについて興味がありまして、僕はそれでいくつかの点で
Imperial
ライトから
Hotel,
学んだような気がするん
I
ですね。
remember a dark,
それは
narrow
日本の
corridor
建築
with
の
an
一
extremely
番
low
重要
ceiling
な空間の
leading
問
into
題
a
を
huge
ライト
hall.
が日本の建築
It
から
was
学ん
like
でいます。
walking through a cave.
この感覚っていうのがこの今の落水槽にも
That
受
same
け入れられてて、
sensibility of
近代建
space is
築
here
が
at
求めてた流
Falling
動
Water.
的で非常に平均的
In
なところを
contrast to what
歩
modern
いていきな
architecture
がら、
sought,
どの場所も
a
同じように出来上がっていく
juxtaposition
の
of
と
a
は正
series
反
of
対に、
uniform
どこ行っても
spaces.
場所があって
Right
どこに行っても違うん
introduces
で
a
すよ、この
series
建
of
築は。
spaces that are
そし
all
て
quite
高い天
different
井があり
from one
低い天井
another.
があり、平和が建物の中に出てきたりして、
The unity
自然
between
と一体
nature
に
and
なってながら
architecture is
洞
achieved
窟の中を
here,
歩いてる
so
ような
that
感
it
じが
is
し
like
て、
walking through a
この
cave.
感じというのがどうも帝国ホテルを見
This is
た
what I
時の
felt at the
他の
Imperial
建築とは
Hotel
全く
too.
違うという感じなんだろうと思うんですね。それが
The
昨
difference
日小
here
舟の
at
音とか
Falling
鳥
Water
の音
is
とか
that the
水の音
elements
と
that
か
I
というもの
discovered
と相
at
ま
the
って
Imperial Hotel
その
are
僕
mixed
には
with
訴え
the
かけてくるん
natural
ですね。
sound of birds, water, and wind, and this appeals to me as an entity.
日本の建築というのは体で建築を覚えて
Japanese architecture relies very much on craftsmen and carpenters. You learn architecture with your body. You draw your working drawings and build while making changes at the site. Craftsmanship is the essence of Japanese architecture.
かなと思うぐらいの感じがするんです。でワンルーム22メーターワンルー
Here
ム
will
で
be a
ずっと丸い
dome with
休憩
exactly the
こういう
same
丸い
dimensions
ガラス
of
ブ
the
ロックの部屋に
pantheon.
なるんです。で柱
It
が
will
ず
be
っ
made
と
of
レッチのよう
glass
に
blocks
立って
supported by numerous
空間
columns.
でロビーであって
It will
そこはホ
mainly
テルにな
serve
っ
as
た
a
り
lobby,
じゃあ
but
ロビー
will
であって
also
そこでホール
function
であったり
as an
ファッ
arena
ションショーを
for
したりするよ
fashion
うになってます。
shows.
最初の旅行の時に
On my first trip to Europe, I went to see Le Corbusier's Unité d'Habitation in Marseille.
それはもうすごい
I was very intrigued by his dynamic use of concrete. It was very rough.
コンクリートを打つ時に硬いコンクリートじゃなくて強度が全く違う
My concrete construction does not involve any special techniques.
かなり難しい。
Its color and texture depend on the quality of cement and the balance of sand and pebbles. I prefer hard concrete because of its strength. However, this is difficult to achieve.
そしてこの場合で
The
言いますと
quality of the concrete construction does not depend so much on the concrete mix itself, but rather on the wooden formwork in which the concrete is cast. In Japan, because of the tradition of wooden architecture, the craft level of carpentry is rather high. The construction of wooden formwork, where not a drop of water will escape from the corners and seams, depends upon this high quality of Japanese craftsmanship. Quality concrete depends upon sufficient consolidation and watertight formwork.
僕はそのコンクリートという素材
Otherwise, holes will appear and the surface will crack and disintegrate.
その感性の中にはないもんだと思いました。
I really like the texture of concrete, but concrete is not part of the Japanese traditional sensibility. Japanese houses are built with wood and paper.
ああいうダイナミック
It is a very sensitive and gentle architecture.
に馴染んだ人とは違う
If you're used to Japanese architecture, a space built with stone and concrete seems totally foreign.
ですから僕自身がコンクリートに対する考え方は
My attitude towards concrete is to look for a kind of concrete that is closer in feeling to wood and paper, to find a beautiful and sensuous concrete.
コンクリートはないだろうかということを考え続けておりましたからこの腰の手におきましてもできるだけそのコンクリー
At the
トは
Koshino residence, I was trying to approach the concrete with the same sensibility as one approaches wood and paper.
この腰の手の
This residence is located in Ashiya, a fashionable suburb of Osaka. Because it's adjacent to a national park, it is surrounded by beautiful trees.
環境を壊さないようにということで
Since the site is so beautiful, I designed the building so as not to disturb the surroundings. From the outside, it looks small, but on the inside, it is quite large. From the outside, it looks as though it has only one story, but on the inside, you will find two stories.
押し込められているようにこうひっそりと立っている
One aspect of my design was to situate the house on a slope. You enter on the first floor and go down these stairs to the living room, the kitchen, and dining area below. Since one floor is below ground, from this point here, you experience two separate floors.
一層分はその地中にうまく埋め込められておりますから、その中に入るとその2層分のその空間がここに展開しているわけです。で、この越野陽子さんというのはファッションデザイナーですから、
Yoko Koshino is a fashion designer. She gives lots of parties, so this space has to accommodate large groups. At the same time, it is used as her private living room.
一つはリビングスペースというよりは仕事兼用のスペースであります。ですからこの空間を非常にダイナミックに作るためにここに光のそのスリットがあります。建築は
Here, I was influenced by the way that light is used in Western architecture.
どんどんと変化して動いていきますから、その度に建築のスペースがその光によって変わってくると。ですから光はその僕自身
At the Koshino residence, the light in the space has two different qualities. The gentle light that appears on the side walls in the atelier,
アトリエで右側リビングと。そしてここに
and the straight and dynamic light that penetrates in the cubic living room. This dynamic light is rare in Japanese architecture. If Yoko Koshino wants to go to her atelier, she'll go through this passage, allowing her to look at green on both sides. Here we are entering the atelier, and light doesn't strike the wall directly, but enters indirectly through another overhead slot. Although this space is mostly underground, you can still have a view of the sloping lawn outside. From the outside, the house looks like two simple boxes, but when you go inside, it's very complicated, like a labyrinth. Here, I'm going through an underground passage connecting the living room to the bedroom wing. The house is designed so as to combine darkness and brightness with high and low ceilings in order to create the rhythm. If one lets light into architecture in many different and subtle ways, one can enjoy light watching. My clients often want to know if I also live in a concrete house. When I say that I actually live in a wooden house, they're very surprised. I have lived in this tenement since I was a child. Some years ago, I added an upstairs space. Environmental atmosphere is very important to me. I am like an animal in a way. My instinct is to come home. Coming home means coming back here. It is like my cave. It would be nice to have a more spacious and beautiful house, but it just wouldn't be the same. In a way, my spirit will always be here. My body wants to come home to my soul. Although this house doesn't get much light, I feel tremendous comfort here. If there are two types of comfort, namely physical and spiritual, spiritual comfort can be sought in darkness, and physical comfort in light. But I need both kinds of comfort. I believe that darkness enriches your soul. I am sorry that modern architecture has eliminated this aspect. We started construction on the first part of Rokko housing in 1978. One of the main characteristics of this project is its location on a 60-degree slope in a suburb of Kobe. I wanted my architecture to enhance the beauty of the surrounding nature. Of all my projects, Rokko housing represents some of my ideas most clearly. It is a combination of 20 simple 18 by 18 foot structural bays. Despite this repetitive module, each apartment layout is unique. I have tried to reinsert certain concepts which were forgotten by the modernists, such as a concern for the attributes of a given place or region, and the need to maintain two entirely different concepts at the same time. Universal technology on the one hand, and the peculiarities of a particular site on the other. While the 20 units seem the same on the outside, within, they are completely different. From the exterior, the entire structure seems to be embedded into the slope of the hill, as if it were destroying the surrounding nature. Once you're within the complex, nature enters at the size of the central piazza, which is situated at the midpoint of the inclined stairway. This space also attempts to combine the traditional Western square with the narrow street space of the Japanese town. I think that this is one of my most important works. We are now working on Rokko Housing Part 2. My main intention is to develop certain ideas that were inhibited by the more formal concerns in the original Rokko housing. The adoption of an open frame rather than cross-wall construction liberates the planning of the internal spaces. There will be 50 units altogether. The scale is 4 times larger than Rokko 1. A large green is planned for the space between the two sections of the Rokko housing. This is to be shared by all the residents. We will also build a long stairway outside. The elevator runs underneath these stairs. On a nice day, the stairs provide not only a beautiful view, but also healthy exercise. As in all my projects, my concern goes beyond the building itself to a consideration of the surrounding landscape. I've always been interested in how architecture and the environment enhance each other. I have been fortunate in being able to observe how Rokko housing has interacted over the years with its immediate environment. Now that we get many large commissions, I like spending some time making changes in my office. This small-scale work is very important to me, especially when I am consumed by larger projects. My inclination for smaller projects perhaps comes from my experience of knowing the joy of intimately working on a small scale. It helps me clarify my ideas. In this instance, we rented a small wooden house of about 350 square feet, close to this office, and built a tea house within it. Tea houses usually require the best quality building materials in terms of wood, paper, and so forth. But I was more interested in building a modern tea house using unorthodox materials. My main intention was to create a small but interesting space. the kind of space that you've never experienced before. Eventually, I would like to make a tea house underground, covered with earth. When I'm 55, I think I will have reached my creative peak in terms of physical energy. After that, I would like to gradually decrease the scale of my projects. If one's creative life ends in the mid-70s, at that time, I would like to go back to designing smaller houses, just like my first projects. I'd like to keep the momentum going of my basic ideas that were expressed in those early projects. I'd like to create space that provides a balance for one's physical comfort and spiritual enrichment. As I said before, we are creating an army of guerrillas. Guerrillas always face destruction in the end, like the kamikaze in World War II. In our case, we will continue fighting until all our guerrillas are destroyed. We will continue to fight, physically and psychologically, without stopping. Continuation means to make progress. While making progress, we will naturally encounter a barrier, and one of us might be blown to pieces. When all our guerrillas have fallen, we will close our office. Destruction is also a condition of creation.